Hello, viewers of Jonathan George Villarreal's Welcome Party. I'm Jonathan George Villarreal, and I am excited to share with you how we can expand our knowledge of the world through the English language. Our videos cover a range of topics such as literature, history, science, and more to provide you with a well-rounded learning experience. Regardless of whether you are a beginner or an experienced learner, our expertly curated videos offer captivating and enlightening content to help you enhance your language proficiency. Today, we will embark on a journey through the history of the United States by delving into the research of its 45 presidents or 46 presidential administrations. From the moment George Washington took his oath of office in 1789 to be present day under the leadership of President Joe Biden, the United States has undergone numerous changes, challenges, and opportunities. Each president has contributed to shaping and defining this nation in their own unique way. And through this presentation, we will explore the distinctive characteristics of each presidential era and the evolution of the United States over time. The founding and early years of the United States from 1789 to 1825 marked a pivotal chapter in the nation's history. During this period, American was just beginning to take shape, and the foremost task of its leaders was to determine its future and define the essence of the nation. The first 5 presidents in American history, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, were instrumental in laying the essential foundations for a free and independent nation. Let us dive into their contributions and visions during this journey. George Washington. Leading this group is George Washington, who not only served as the first president of the United States, but is also often referred to as the father of this nation. Before assuming the presidency, he led the struggle for American independence, defeated the British, and played a crucial role in the establishment of the United States. He also championed religious freedom in his role as president. John Adams. The second president, made many significant decisions and established fundamental government institutions. He was the primary author of the Thoughts on Government and the 1780 Massachusetts Constitution, both of which influenced the United States' old Constitution. He was also the biological father of John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, the 5th President, is the author of the Declaration of Independence of the United States and the founder of the Democratic Republican Party. He also orchestrated the Louisiana Purchase, opening up new opportunities and expanding the nation's territory. After serving 2 presidential terms, he withdrew from the political spotlight and established the University of Virginia. James Madison. The 4th president, is often regarded as the father of the U.S. Constitution and the author of the Bill of Rights. He was also concerned about the continuation of slavery in the Southern states. Madison believed that relocating free African Americans to Africa was a viable solution. However, in reality, most of these individuals wanted to stay in America where they were born, and they opposed the colonization policy. James Monroe. Finally, James Monroe, the 5th president, introduced the Monroe Doctrine, aimed at ensuring that no European powers would interfere in Americas. However, he couldn't conceal his ambition to turn South America into the backyard of the United States. The group of presidents during the founding and early years of the United States left a profound mark on the nation's history. They played a crucial role not only in constructing the U.S. Constitution and securing the rights of its citizens, but also in demonstrating vision, determination, and courage in shaping a new nation. This journey has shown that with proper leadership and unity, humble beginnings can transform into a great and free nation. The first presidents of the United States accomplished just that, leaving a strong foundation of the future of the country. Group 2 takes us into the era of renewal and expansion, a period marked by significant changes and challenges in American history. From 1825 to 1865, the president in this group faced unique challenges and opportunities. This group includes 10 presidents: John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Miller Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, the sixth president, graduated from Harvard University with honors. He deeply despised and abhorred the growing institution of slavery and became a pioneer in opposing it in the United States. Adams sought to modernize the nation's economy, reform education, conceptualize the idea of building a railroad system, and established the Smithsonian Institution, a crucial national entity for American culture and science. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, the seventh president, was a former military general in the U.S. Army and served in both houses of the U.S. Congress. Jackson ran for the presidency again in 1828, defeating his predecessor Adams by a significant margin. His presidency was marked by the threat of secession from South Carolina. His anti-bank stance and the policies of forcibly removing Native Americans from their ancestral lands tarnished his reputation significantly. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren, the eighth president of Dutch descent, was the only U.S. president for whom English was a second language. He aimed to re-establish a two-party system based on ideological differences rather than personality or class distinctions. Faced with the economic crisis of 1837, Van Buren focused on establishing an independent treasury system, storing government funds in vaults instead of banks. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, the ninth president, passed away just a month after taking office due to pneumonia. He holds the record. He holds the record for the shortest time served as president in U.S. history. His death plunged the United States into a constitutional crisis, resulting in three different presidents within 1 year in 1841. John Tyler. Following Harrison's passing, Vice President John Tyler assumed the presidency, becoming the 10th president of the United States. Initially a Democrat, Tyler switched to the Whig Party due to disagreements with former President Andrew Jackson, whom he saw in abusing executive power during the Bank War. Tyler championed the acquisition of Texas and Oregon territories, expanding the nation's territory. James K. Polk. James K. Polk. The 11th president was a member of the Democratic Party and also a protege of former President Andrew Jackson. He is renowned for the territorial expansion of the United States during the Mexican-American War, acquiring significant southwestern territory annexing the Republic of Texas, settling the Oregon boundary and negotiating Mexico's cession, resulting in a substantial change to the nation map. Zachary Tyler. Zachary Tyler, the 12th president, passed away after only 1 year in office due to stomach illness, but left his mark by addressing national security challenges. He was a major general in the U.S. Army, with notable achievements in the Mexico-American War. Despite being a Southerner and a slaveholder, Tyler did not strongly support the expansion of slavery. The Whig Party sought to persuade Tyler to represent them in the 1848 presidential election despite his lack of a clear political ideology. Miller Fillmore. After Tyler's passing, Vice President Miller Fillmore assumed office for the remainder of Tyler's term. Born into a poor farming family, Fillmore diligently pursued education and became a successful lawyer, eventually becoming the 13th President of the United States. He advocated for opening the borders to California, was honored for successes in foreign policy, but also faced criticism for enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act and being associated with the Know Nothing movement. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce, the 13th president, believed that the abolitionist movement posed a threat to the nation's unity despite facing conflicts over the issue of slavery in Kansas, Nebraska. He failed to reconcile the tensions between the northern and southern states, laying the groundwork for the Southern secession from the Union and eventually leading to the American Civil War. James Buchanan. James Buchanan, the 15th president, supported the Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott case, which triggered outrage in the political landscape. He is harshly criticized by historians as a primary factor in the early eruption of the American Civil War. He is considered one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. Group 2 left a profound mark on U.S. history and contributed to shaping the nation's culture, economy, and politics. This period was a critical part of America's journey towards becoming a powerful and diverse nation. The period from 1865 to 1933 in the history of the United States was marked by significant changes and challenges while also witnessing the emergence of several presidents who influenced the nation's shape and future. Group 3 consisting of 9 presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James A. Garfield, Chester A. Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, and William McKinley confronted unique challenges and opportunities during this era. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, succeeded in preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, strengthening the federal government, and modernizing the U.S. economy. He notably led the nation through the American Civil War, sought to reconcile a war-torn nation through reconciliation. In 1865, while attending a play at Ford's Theatre, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln is remembered as a national hero of the United States and is consistently ranked as one of the greatest presidents in American history. Andrew Johnson. Replacing Lincoln was Vice President Andrew Johnson, who became the 17th President of the United States and played a significant role in the Alaska Purchase. Due to financial difficulties and concerns about British influence in Western Canada, Russia feared losing Alaska in the event of military conflict with Britain. Consequently, the Russian Empire sold the territory to the United States. However, President Johnson, confronted with the challenges of the post-Civil War era, faced a number of disagreements with Congress over the policies for reconstructing the American South, ultimately leading to his impeachment by the House of Representatives. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th president, was a former Union general who led the Federal Army to victory during the American Civil War. His domestic policy aimed at assimilating Native Americans into Anglo-American culture. His foreign policy primarily focused on peace and avoiding war, and he skillfully resolved the Alabama dispute with the United Kingdom. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th president, was the third Civil War general to ascend to the presidency. He staunchly supported the abolitionist movement and protected runaway slaves from the South. He championed educational and social reforms, restored public trust in the office of the president. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield, the 20th president, possessed exceptional oratory skills and helped revitalize the presidency by cracking down on corruption within the Postal Service and making appointments to the United States Supreme Court. However, just six months into his presidency, he was assassinated at a train station in Washington, D.C. Although he didn't die immediately and received extensive medical care for 2 months, his wound became infected, ultimately leading to his death. Chester A. Arthur. Replacing Garfield was Vice President Chester A. Arthur. He became the 21st President of the United States. He played a role in the reform or modernization of the U.S. Navy and signed The Chinese Exclusion Act limiting Chinese immigration to the United States authors less robust have a relatively low-key political demeanor contributed to his somewhat overshadowed legacy in American history. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, the 22nd and 24th President of the United States, is the only individual in American history to have served two non-consecutive terms as president. He opposed tariff hikes, imperialism, corruption, patronage, and political Marxism. He supported the gold standard and opposed the free silver movement. Cleveland was known for his honesty, independence, affability, and commitment to his classical liberal principles. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president, was a grandson of the 9th president, William Henry Harrison. He enacted the McKinley Tariff and the Sherman Antitrust Act. He also oversaw the addition of 6 new western states to the federal territory. However, his tariff policies resulted in a surplus in the federal treasury and budgetary issues, ultimately leading to his failure to secure re-election in the race against his predecessor Grover Cleveland, who became the 24th president. William McKinley. Lastly, in Group 3, we have William McKinley, the 25th president, who began his career as a low-ranking soldier in the U.S. military. He was the last Civil War veteran to be elected president. He successfully led the United States in the Spanish-American War and compelled Spain to sign the Paris Treaty in 1898, which ceded overseas territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines, and Cuba to the United States. In the same year, he also oversaw the annexation of the Republic of Hawaii into the United States. In 1901, McKinley was assassinated by a Polish-American anarchist, the tragic of the political violence. Group 3 marked the recovery and development of the United States after the Civil War, showcasing the importance of leadership and determination in building a strong future for the nation. Group 4 takes us into a period of significant change in the Cold War era. This group consists of 5 presidents: Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Warren G. Harding, and Calvin Coolidge. Theodore Roosevelt. Following President McKinley's assassination just 8 days after the event, then Vice President Theodore Roosevelt assumed the presidency and became the 26th President of the United States. He is one of the 4 faces carved into Mount Rushmore alongside George Washington, the first president, Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd president, and Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president. Roosevelt implemented anti-monopoly policies during the Progressive era, promoted human rights, environmental conservation policies and played a role in the construction of the Panama Canal. William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft, the 27th president, also served as the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, making him the only person in U.S. history to hold both positions. He focused on foreign policies in East Asia rather than Europe, and consistently intervened to support and overthrow governments in Latin America. Due to his deteriorating health, Taft resigned in February 1930 and passed away 1 month later. Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president, undertook a major economic restructuring through various new policies and led the United States into World War I in 1917 by requesting that the U.S. Congress declare war on Germany in response to submarine warfare. After the war, he introduced the concept of the League of Nations through his 14 points and advocated for world peace through the League of Nations. Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding, the 29th president, led the United States during the post-World War I era of recovery. He passed away suddenly due to a heart attack just 2 years into his presidency. After a heart death, several scandals, such as a Teapot Dome scandal and allegations of an extramarital affair with Nan Britton, came to light, leading to Harding being evaluated as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. Calvin Coolidge. Following Harding's death, Vice President Calvin Coolidge assumed the presidency, becoming the 30th president of the United States. Calvin Coolidge successfully resolved the Boston police strike, supported radical equality issues, advocated for a limited government that did not heavily intervene in social activities, and restored public trust in the White House after the scandals of his predecessor's administration. Group 4 contributed to reshaping the United States in the post-World War I era and during the Cold War period. The president in this group promoted economic development and redefined the role of the United States in the international community. Group 5, comprising 16 presidents from 1981 to the present, brings us into the contemporary era and the challenges of a globalized world. It starts with Herbert Hoover, the 31st president, and extends to Joe Biden, the current president. Herbert Hoover, the 31st president, was a progressive thinker and the author of several famous books. He faced the greatest economic crisis in American history, the Great Depression. Hoover implemented economic measures to try to address the situation, but none led to a full economic recovery during his tenure. Franklin D. Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd president, is the only individual to win four presidential elections consecutively in 1933, 1937, 1940, and 1944. He initiated the New Deal to rescue the United States from the Great Depression. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Roosevelt led the United States into World War II against Japan. He closely collaborated with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, and Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek in leading the Allied powers against the Axis powers and laid the foundation for the United States in the post-World War II era. His administration oversaw the construction of the Pentagon, initiated the development of the world's first atomic bomb, making the United States a superpower. Despite battling polio and suffering from arteriosclerosis, Roosevelt passed away in 1945 due to cerebral hemorrhage. The momentous decision of whether to use the atomic bomb or not fell to his successor, President Truman. Harry Truman followed President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Vice President Harry Truman assumed the presidency, becoming the 33rd President of the United States. Not long after, Truman allowed the first and only use of atomic bombs in warfare. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb Little Boy was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. 3 days later, the second bomb, Fat Man, detonated in the skies over Nagasaki, Japan. Many victims died months and even years later due to the effects of radiation. The Empire of Japan unconditionally surrendered to the Allied powers and signed the surrender documents on September 2, 1945, officially ending World War II. In the post-war period, Harry Truman implemented the Marshall Plan to repeal Western Europe's economy and founded the Truman Doctrine and NATO. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president, was a former U.S. Army general and the first supreme commander of NATO, consistently applying pressure on the Soviet Union during the Cold War. He threatened the use of nuclear weapons to compel China to agree to a ceasefire in the Korean War. Eisenhower pursued a conservative domestic policy throughout his two consecutive terms. He introduced the Eisenhower Doctrine, which emphasized the significant U.S. commitment to the security and stability of the Middle East. John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, the 35th president, was the youngest politician at 42 years old ever elected as President of the United States during a turbulent period in global history. His presidency witnessed events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the construction of the Berlin Wall, the space race, the early stages of the Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. He is famous for his quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." He initiated the Bay of Pigs invasion to infiltrate Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. which ultimately ended in failure. In 1963, he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Kennedy is still regarded as one of the greatest presidents of the United States, and his image remains a significant cultural icon in many aspects of American society. Lyndon B. Johnson. Following Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson assumed the presidency, becoming the 36th President of the United States. He actively engaged in the Vietnam War and was responsible for enactment of the Great Society legislation, which included laws supporting civil rights, combating racial discrimination, public broadcasting, Medicare, Medicaid, environmental protection, education funding, arts funding, urban and rural development, and the war on poverty, marking the peak of modern liberalism in the United States after the era of the New Deal. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, the 37th president, witnessed a reduction in U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Détente with the Soviet Union and China, and a withholding of aid to Israel during the Yom Kippur War. During his 5 years in the White House, during his second term, Nixon faced the Watergate scandal, which ultimately led to his resignation. Gerald Ford. Following Nixon's resignation, Vice President Gerald Ford assumed the presidency, becoming the 38th President of the United States. Ford worked to ease tensions between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War and brought an end to US involvement in the Vietnam War, leading to the complete collapse of the Republic of Vietnam. Later, when Ronald Reagan was elected as the 40th president, he invited Gerald Ford to return as vice president, but Ford declined. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, the 39th president, marked a period of decline as the United States faced significant challenges, including severe damage from the Vietnam War and economic stagnation. His presidency was characterized by events such as the Iran hostage crisis and the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, leading to a decline in America's international reputation. Inflation and unemployment both rose by 50% during his 4 years in office. However, Carter also achieved notable accomplishments such as the Panama Canal Treaty, the Camp David Accords, and an active advocacy for human rights on a global scale. He was later awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, was a former radio announcer and film actor who became a charismatic speaker. He introduced Reaganomics, which supported tax cuts to stimulate economic growth, deregulation, reduce government spending, lower inflation, and the war on drugs. Reagan shifted the Cold War policy from détente to a more confrontational approach by continuing the arms race with the Soviet Union. He supported the core tenets of modern American conservatism, free market capitalism, anti-communism, low taxes and limited government. Many historians and scholars consider Ronald Reagan one of the greatest presidents in American history. George H. W. Bush. George H. W. Bush, the 41st president, also known as Bush 41st or Bush Sr., because he was the father of George W. Bush, the 43rd president of the United States, became the second father-son pair in U.S. history to serve as presidents, following John Adams or John Quincy Adams. Bush Sr. played a key role in helping reunify Germany and rebuild the Cold War after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Additionally, he successfully led the U.S. in the invasion of Panama and the Gulf War to end Iraq's occupation of Kuwait. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, the 42nd president, was known for his New Democrats stance, which aimed for the centrist approach and appeal to the common people. During his 2 terms in office, he presided over continuous economic growth, a significant reduction in unemployment, and a booming stock market. Clinton sent troops to Haiti to end a period of violence and turmoil in the country. In 1994, his administration lifted economic and trade sanctions on Vietnam and established full diplomatic relations with the country. Despite notable achievements, Bill Clinton faced impeachment by the House of Representatives in connection with various scandals, including Travelgate, Janagate, Portgate, and the Monica Lewinsky sex scandal, though he was ultimately acquitted by the Senate. George W. Bush. George W. Bush, the 43rd president, is often referred to as Bush Jr., a Bush 43rd. In response to the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, he initiated the War on Terror and launched the campaign with the war in Afghanistan in 2001 and the Iraq War in 2003. Bush Jr. faced criticism for his handling of the nation through the 2008 economic crisis, leading some experts to label him as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. Barack Obama. Barack Obama, the 44th president, was the first African American president in U.S. history. During his first 2 years in office, he signed several landmark bills. He increased the U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan and ended military intervention in Iraq. Obama successfully authorized by the operation to kill Osama bin Laden. He also supported Israel in quelling Palestinian uprising, intervened in Syrian politics, and worked to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. He believed in the redemption and resurrection of Jesus Christ and adopted the Christian faith later in life. Obama pushed for healthcare reform through Obamacare and dealt with various global challenges during his presidency. Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the 45th president, was a billionaire, businessman, a reality television producer. He followed populist, protectionist, and nationalist ideology. Trump signed Executive Order 13769, which imposed travel bans on citizens from Muslim-majority countries for security reasons. He engaged in a trade war with China, completed the Mexico-US border wall, and made Mexico pay for it, withdrew US troops for northern Syria, had three summits for peace talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Despite heavy international criticism, Trump faced impeachment by the House of Representatives for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, but was ultimately acquitted by the Senate. Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was heavily criticized, leading to his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. He also faced the storming of the US Capitol by his supporters, making him the only US president to be impeached twice. Joe Biden. Joe Biden, 46th president, has been in office since 2021 and previously served as the 44th vice president under Barack Obama. He withdrew US troops from Afghanistan as the Afghan government collapsed and the country fell under Taliban control. He imposed sanctions on Russia and provided economic and military aid to Ukraine during the ongoing conflict with Russia. Biden has blamed Vladimir Putin for the food and energy crisis. He expressed his belief that life begins at conception but won't impose his Catholic beliefs on others. He expanded social safety nets, the American Jobs Plan, supported reproductive rights and same-sex marriage. In the upcoming 2024 presidential race, Joe Biden will face significant contenders such as Donald Trump, the 45th president, Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's grandson, Nikki Haley, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Asa Hutchinson, former Arkansas governor, and several other potential candidates who have not officially declared their candidacy. The Group 5 has witnessed significant changes in the history of the United States and has contributed to shaping the nation's future, from the Great Depression to crucial wars and vital national policies. The presidents within this group have faced numerous challenges and important opportunities ahead. In this journey through the 46 presidents of the United States, we have seen diversity and constant evolution in the nation's history. From the founding fathers to contemporary presidents, each has set their own priorities and goals to shape the future of the United States. We have witnessed unity during difficult times such as the American Civil War and World War II, and have also faced significant challenges in the economic, social, and international spheres. This group of presidents have driven groundbreaking changes and made significant contributions to the development of the United States. In the future, the United States will continue to confront various challenges and opportunities. However, by studying the histories and experiences of past presidents, we can learn and progress further on the path of the nation's development and prosperity. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Your questions, comments, and feedback are always welcome and appreciated. So please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, please do hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting and enlightening content. By hitting the notification bell, you'll be sure to never miss any very exciting and thought-provoking episodes. Don't forget to share our channel with your friends and family who may also find our content beneficial. We are committed to providing you with high quality, well researched, and engaging content that will help you improve your English language skills and expand your knowledge. And I look forward to sharing more insightful and inspiring things with you in the near future.